From Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Hayward, which I'll get to in just a bit. Church in Transition is the title of this workshop, monoethnic to multi-ethnic. Thinking about that in our world, where we live, especially in our district, and then thinking about that as the church as well. And I'm going to just share a few of the things of our things that our congregation, kind of what we've been going through transitions. As I mentioned, a little bit about myself. Grew up on the West Coast in Oregon. My parents are actually here right now. My dad is a retired LCMS pastor, and his first call as a second career guy was in the mountains in northern New Mexico to start a church. And that kind of had an influence on me later in life in the sense of starting something from scratch. I was a teacher before, and then as I mentioned, I was a missionary in Guatemala for 5 years. My wife is here running around, not here, but I met her in Guatemala. She's Guatemalan. And out of the seminary, as a second career guy, I was called to Hayward 6.5 years ago to start an Hispanic ministry. And then from that, my role has been kind of changing, which we'll talk a little bit about. Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Hayward. It was started in 1954. Bless you. Started in 1954. This is our 60th anniversary this year. When it was started, Hayward was a suburb of Oakland. And Oakland at that time, a lot of people that were here after World War II, they were starting brand new families and they had to find a house that they could afford. Hayward was apricot orchards, chickens and so forth. So they built all these houses up, young families came, lots of kids, and at that time we know the bridge was still over the river. So you built a church in the neighborhood and people said, where's the closest church? Because when you moved into a house, you had to find a church, and they did, and they'd come to Good Shepherd because it was right there in the middle of this area in South Hayward. Many of our churches may have kind of a similar story in that sense. This church has been blessed with faithful and capable and loving pastors throughout its history. Just me coming there seeing every church, every gathering of people were sinners, and we can see that there's brokenness. But I've also been blessed to see that this place has not had deep brokenness, as we know some congregations have gone through. So just kind of give a background of our gathering of people. When I first came 6.5 years ago, we had 2 services in English. And just to give you an idea, we had about probably 200 members. There was an early morning family service that maybe about 10 years before I came in the late 90s. Was growing really well, and then the dot-com crisis hit, and all the young families moved to Texas. So I came, and there was an early morning service that was a family service, but there was about 20 people in it, and there was no families. It was basically people that liked to get church over with by 9:15 and go do the rest of their Sunday. And then the other service probably had about 100 in it. So we were about 125, 130 on a Sunday morning, the 2 together, just in English. But this community that was founded in the 1950s, that was mostly a white suburban neighborhood, had transitioned into an urban area. Hayward, its theme is the heart of the bay, yet many people in the bay like to call it the armpit of the bay. Because Hayward is small houses that were put up really fast. Housing is cheap, relatively speaking, for the rest of the bay. So you tend to get people who don't have the money to go other places. The schools are not very good, so even if someone comes in there and gets a first starter house, if they're fairly well off, they're going to move somewhere else because the schools aren't very good. Very transitional community where we live. So the community has changed completely, and that was part of the reason they called me to come. There's a large Hispanic community, but lots of other people. So we're going to see, we now worship in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Tigrinya, and the Lord's opened up another door, which we just found out about a week and a half ago. We might have 4 languages here pretty soon. Oromo, which is a language from Ethiopia. Tigrinya is from Eritrea. Spanish, and then English. And one of our goals is thinking about monoethnic to multi-ethnic. And I'm going to get to this, but I kind of want to help you a little bit. Is not just multi-ethnic in the sense of, wow, we've got English and Spanish and Tigrinya and maybe Oromo, we're multi-ethnic. We want to take even those 4 groups, they're really 4 monoethnic groups. Our English group is fairly multi-ethnic, but it's mostly dominated by older people who are Caucasian. So if we look at that, just ethnically speaking, those groups still tend to be monoethnic. So what we're trying to do right now is, even along with helping these monoethnic groups as they gather on the Word, we're also trying to figure out how do we plant a multi-ethnic ministry, truly multi-ethnic. And what does that mean? That means we need to give ownership and connect with people who are from the 1.5 or second generation immigrant. What does that mean? A 1.5 generation immigrant is someone who was born in another country but came here as a child. Okay? So Pastor Enrique is back here from San Jose. His youngest son, Juan. Juan was born in Guatemala. ¿Y cuántos años tenía cuando venías?
8 years old.
8. So Juan, his son, who's now a vicar, is going to be a pastor. He's vicaring in Watsonville. Juan is a 1.5 generation. He was born in Guatemala, but at 8 years old he came here and he grew up culturally in this place. Now, the cool thing about a 1.5, a second generation, is that they were actually born here even their parents came from another country. So I have 2 children who are 1.5 generation. They were born in Guatemala. And I have 2 children who are second generation. They were born right here. Okay, but their mother's Guatemalan, my wife. Well, the cool thing about 1.5 and second generation is they're used to living in multiple worlds at the same time. Multiple languages, multiple cultures. That's part of who they are and just their identity. And if we look in many of our neighborhoods, many of our young people, that is the norm for them. Going to school with people, oh, here's my friend, this friend, and that friend, and so forth. And one of my boys, his kindergarten class had 13 kids in it, and 7 different languages. You know, out of 13 kids. You know, but that was normal. Maybe for us that's not. So for a multi-ethnic ministry, what we're even trying to get to is, how do we help plant something that is even connecting with our young people in our community that, and here's the key, sometimes we think, well, they speak English, why don't they just come to our English service? But what we don't realize is, culturally, it's kind of a foreign land to some. When we think about maybe a 1.5 generation, a young person, that maybe sometimes, I'll take our Eritrean group, our Eritrean young people I was working with. They're not Eritrean enough for their parents because they don't speak the language or speak it well. So if they were to go to speak Tigrinya to a first generation immigrant from Eritrea, they'd be like, well, your Tigrinya is terrible. You're not Eritrean enough. Yet, even though they speak English very, very well because they grew up here, if they come in with maybe a culture of church that is much more Anglo, they're going to be like, well, you're maybe not American enough in that sense. And oftentimes 1.5 and second generation people feel like, well, they're neither this nor that, we're kind of in the middle. We're kind of this and we're kind of that, but we're also kind of our own thing. And in a sense, 1.5 and second generation, they actually connect better with each other, even if it might be a second generation Eritrean, a second generation Hispanic, a second generation Chinese, a second generation Vietnamese, because they have this commonality of, my parents are first generation immigrants, I've lived my whole life doing this dance between the culture of my parents that they brought with them, yet the culture I'm growing up in at the same time. Okay? So we're trying to do kind of that on several different levels. And key for that is, you got to have 1.5 and second generation people who are also leading, which we'll get to what we're trying to do. This congregation has been and still is a church in transition. All churches are in transition, right? We're walking, and the Lord continues to work on us, in us, through us, in spite of us, and even without us. And that's the good thing. He knows what He's doing. Generational transition, 60-year-old church. Life cycles of a church about 60 to 80 years. Ours is, we have a lot of people who are in their 80s and 90s or have just passed away since I've been there in 6.5 years. So sometimes right now in our English service we might have 70 people in church. We might have 10% of those that are over 90. 7 people still coming to church that are in their 90s. And many. So there's a generation shift. But many of their children and their grandchildren no longer live in Hayward. because Hayward has shifted and they've moved to Livermore, right? Or to Pleasanton or some other place. They've moved out of that urban area. So there's a generational transition that needs to happen, but there's also the demographic transition in the congregation and in the neighborhood that's going on. And because of that, we also are going through a leadership transition of kind of learning to pass the baton of things that we've always done before and what we've been in charge of, and being able to let go of that and allow others to be able to take the reins a little bit. All right, so this is what I'm going to give you, and it's on that sheet you got there. Does everyone have a copy of that? Anyone come in late, not get, looks like this? Okay. It says, Church and Transition from Monoethnic to Multi-Ethnic. I put up here top 10 multi-ethnic lessons we're learning and still need to keep learning. We got a bunch of them. What are those things that we still need to keep learning? And before I get into this, before we do this top 10, I just want to share some of that. I laid out a sheet there, but this is kind of a funny thing that I found, because you may be coming and thinking, this sounds a little scary. This is from Unity in Christ magazine. It's an online magazine that talks about multi-ethnic ministry. It's on the back of your sheet. I put on the resources there. But this was Art Lucero, who's a pastor in Rialto, California. This is a multi-ethnic church. He wrote 6 fears about immigrant ministry, and you don't have it in front of you, but I'll just share them. They're kind of funny. They're very true. First fear, losing control of our church. This is by far the most common fear. Leadership is concerned that if immigrant ministry begins to grow, they can easily have the majority vote and take over. So we have to ask ourselves, whose church is it, ours or the Lord's? Second fear, multiple cultures in one church will create disunity. Disunity is not caused by different cultures and personalities. Disunity is caused by selfishness, sinful behavior, unhealthy relationships, poor communication. Third one, immigrants will mistreat or take advantage of our church. So sometimes that's, we're opening this place up and they're gonna ruin this, so they're gonna take advantage of that in that sense. Fourth one, they don't speak English, we won't be able to communicate. That one can be a tough one. That one's, we deal with that and we look at what are the positives that come out of that. Fifth one, it will be uncomfortable to make adjustments to the way they do things. We're gonna see, you have to make lots of adjustments and be adaptable. Last one, this is a big one. They will abuse our buildings, right? So the Eritrean group, they like to make tea that have these cloves in it. And for like a year, it was trying to help, okay, it clogs up the coffee maker, you know, and whoever did the coffee for the English service. These cloves are driving me nuts, you know, the whole thing. So how do you work through little things like that can blow up into big things, because they're not taking care of the things that way that we take care of them, that we think. So these are fears that people have because of that. So, how do we go beyond all that? That's what we're going to look a little bit. Top 10 multi-ethnic lessons we're learning, still need to keep learning. These I kind of put in an order. They're kind of flexible, but for you to think about as leaders in the church, whether pastor or a lay leader, to think about as you're going along here. First one. This is key, or number 10, if we're counting down to number 1. Building trust. And I've got there, you need the heart of a shepherd. Maybe you see in your congregation, we're here and we need to go to here, and there's these steps we need to take. This is my temptation to want to kind of force and manipulate everyone to move from here to here really, really quickly, without slowing down and building trust with people. How do we slowly do that, yet not sit and wait forever? Just some ideas for us of building trust. For me, coming in as a church planter of Church in Hispanic ministry, there were some people that were very happy that that was happening. There were some people in the congregation that weren't so happy that that was happening. So how do we build trust with them? The first thing that we do is we listen. We get to know them. So one of the first things I did is I went and visited everyone in their homes. I just want to know more about you. Tell me your story. Tell me the story of this congregation. Tell me the story of your family. One of the things that I do and that I still do is I have our church roster that I just go down and every day write down the roster and check, take a family, and I specifically pray for that family. Bought a box of note cards from Target, cheapies. and write down, this morning I prayed for you, and here's the specific things that I prayed for. One thing, it helps me be accountable as a pastor in a sense of I'm called to be an intercessor for you and your family. Yet at the same time, how many people come say, wow, thank you for praying for me, for our families, because we were going through this that maybe you didn't even know. Of a way to build trust in the sense of, I'm not just here to abandon you or to blow up the bridge, as Greg used, because there's still people on it, and I care about you, and we care about you. What are ways that you and your congregation can build trust little by little, and it takes time? So things that I wanted to happen 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, they're only happening right now sometimes. Things that I want to happen right now, it'll probably take a little bit longer. And trust is a big, huge part of that. A lot of allowing someone saying, yes, Pastor, that sounds like a good idea. A lot of that is that there's a lot of trust of, we don't think he's crazy, or, yeah, I like that. You got a chuckle. Don't think he's crazy, or in the sense of, I'm afraid to do that, in the sense of, yeah, that still scares me, but I'm willing to take that step along with it, because there's been trust that's been built up there. Think of this heart of the shepherd. There's a story talking about shepherds in the Middle East. That a guy was saying, shepherds in the Middle East, they never drive sheep. They would always call sheep. So the shepherd would go first and call the sheep behind them, and the sheep would follow because there was this relationship that was built. So this guy was a tour guide, and he's telling this story about shepherds and everything, and all of the people that were with him as the tour guides were like, well, what's going on behind you then? And he turned around, and there were all these sheep going crazy, running, and these trucks behind them, just all driving behind them. The sheep were all scattered and scared and the whole thing, and he's like, what is going on? After he's just telling the people that a shepherd leads and then follows. So he goes over to the guy in the truck, and he says, what's going on? Shepherds lead and call the sheep, and they follow, and you guys are driving them. And the guy says, shepherd? I'm not a shepherd, I'm a butcher. And I think that can happen in the church if as leaders, if we're doing so much pushing from behind of trying to do that, we end up causing a massacre instead of building trust and leading and calling people along with us in that way. So that was that first one. Build trust. This is always, 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 always continue. Okay? And then part of that, how do you build trust? Again, listen, I mentioned. Listen and learn your context. And by context, I mean where you're at, where you've been placed, and the first context is your congregation. Listen to the people in your gathering. Learn their story. You're building trust that way, but you're also learning a lot about the specific congregation and the context that's there. What are the hurts that are still there from 30 years ago that someone brings up that you don't even know that, but that can cause all kinds of issues later on? What are some of the joys or the histories that you can build off of that you didn't know, and you learn about that? Then you also want to listen and learn to your context of your community context, your neighborhood context. Up here I just have this is a screenshot of our census tract, so where our church is. You can get this off if you just Google in New York Times census map. It's a great tool. It comes up and you get a whole picture. You can go right over your census tracts and it gives you all this information. That's by colored dots. So the dots kind of give you sections. This is from 2010, so ours has probably changed. 2010 in our census tract of the church, 11% Anglo. Okay, when the church was started in the 50s, it was probably 97% Anglo, the community. That's probably less than 2000. This is 2010, 2014. We're probably like 8 or 7%. How do I know? Because a lot of those Anglos that were in this census tract were part of our congregation that have passed away in the past 4 years. So you can see just the Hispanic, 60%. Even that's probably going down a little bit. Numbers of Indian, Afghani, Pakistani. Last week someone came into the church, talked to me from Romania. Right after that was someone from Iran that lives right down the street from me. Our neighbors are from Fiji. Fiji's right next to us. China's in front of us. 2 from Mexico. Filipino here. just literally a mix of people from all over the world. But you gotta learn your context and listen to it. You gotta relate with people and hear and get to know something about them. That's, again, a continual thing. How do you do that in your area? How do you listen to your and learn the context of your congregation and your community? In the midst of all this, you can look at that and go, ooh, wow, that looks really hard, or so forth. When you're doing all this, you have to be really adaptable. I was looking for a slide that didn't say plan A to plan B. I was looking for one that said plan A to plan Z. As you go through, we're really good. Our culture, and American culture, is a planning culture. We love to have plans. That's kind of how we grow up, and culturally are like that. When you work with Hispanics or Eritreans or so forth, you know, Dawit, which I'll introduce you to a little bit, he goes, okay, so Pastor, when are we going to do this? I said, in 6 months. And the Anglo group is like, 6 months? You're not giving us any time. They're freaking out in 6 months. And Dawit goes, well, I'll probably talk to him about 2 weeks ahead of time, because if I talk to him 6 weeks, or 6 months, that's way too far away. And just to see culturally different how we go about doing things, and to realize we may make a plan, but we're going to adapt and adapt and adapt and adapt. Now, how does that happen in a congregation without people getting frustrated? You got to build a lot of trust. And you got to continue to build the trust, because eventually people will go, oh my gosh, we keep on adapting. How do you figure out ways to be able to adapt? Part of that is communication, part of that is just sharing joys, part of that is saying, the Lord knows what He's doing even when we don't. The Lord can do things with broken tools and broken plans and change plans. All right, number 7. Things we're learning and still need to learn. Confessing ethnocentricity. Big old word there. Ethno, right? Ethno, peoples, nations. Centricity, being in the center. Ethnocentricity, we all deal with this. We all have our own ethnic, cultural lenses that we see the world through. Okay? If you ever go live in another culture, then it really exposes that in yourself, of how you see the world and how you function. So ethnocentricity is, this is the way I see how the world works and how it should function. But usually what happens, because we're sinners, is that the way I see the world, I also take to the next level of, this is the way the world should work. And people that don't see the world in that way, they've got a problem, we think. Okay? So, our culture is usually a culture that's very much on time. Okay? So I'll use our Tigrinya group. Pastor Aaron, we're going to do a baptism in the English service, because you speak English. Okay, great. So I know the African group, not always on time. So I said, okay, we're going to start church a half an hour later. I'm going to put the baptism after the sermon, not at the beginning, because make sure anyone who comes late and so forth. So get done with the sermon, and they're still not there. The family is for the baptism. All right. So we got to go to adaptable, but also the way in the sense of you can get really frustrated and say, okay, they see the world differently. They're event-oriented, not time-oriented. When we get there, and that's great. Now, for some of us, we're like, I don't like that. But to realize we see the world differently, and we have to confess, Lord, oftentimes I see the way I look at the world better than the way that they look at the world. I repent of that. Please forgive me of that. And as we work together, how do I flip this around from a negative of me saying, I know how the world should work and you don't, you need to figure that out. How do I flip that around to, isn't it wonderful that the Lord has brought many different perspectives of us together, and that we can learn from that perspective, and we're going to see opportunities from different perspectives that'll give us a fuller picture of the reality of who we are as God's people, and a fuller picture of the reality of our community that we're trying to reach. How can we make that step? And that's a slow one, but that's an important one that's going to come up. It's just the way that we see the world, and how do we confess that oftentimes we put ourselves in the way we see the world in the middle of everything. All right, embrace indigenous leadership. By indigenous, I don't mean non-white. By indigenous, I mean that leadership from within that own group or that own community. So, for example, if I'm going to say 1.5 or second generation ministry, which we're trying to start, an indigenous leader is someone who is a 1.5 or second generation. They're part of that group itself, an insider from that. Well, in our case, the young man on the left, he kind of fits two profiles. He's real gifted. His name is David Bokre. He was born in Eritrea, came here when he was 13 to the States. So he's a 1.5 generation. He speaks Tigrinya fluently. So he is a vicar right now. He's in a program called the Ethnic Immigrant Institute of Theology. It's through Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. So he's doing his studies and his vicarage all at the same time right here locally through the internet and elsewhere. And I work with him on that. So he does our Tigrinya service. Yet at the same time, he's also helping us plant the 1.5 second generation because that's who he is. So he can go from here to speaking Tigrinya, very elder, very much traditional, respectful African culture, and then he can flip a switch and right here, and he can be talking with street talk with those that are in our community because he lives in both those worlds. So we see him as indigenous because he's an insider in those demographics, in those groups. So how do I not try to do everything? How do I invest my time in supporting him? And then how does he invest in time in supporting others as well? On the right, we have Moises Morales. When I came 6.5 years ago to start a Hispanic ministry, my goal was never to be the Hispanic pastor. All right? So even though I speak Spanish and I lived in a Latin American country, we want someone who's an Hispanic, being able to be an insider in that culture to be able to do that. So a lot of praying, Lord, why haven't you provided a person? Why haven't you trying to make connections with people in the community, trying to raise up leaders? Well, the Lord in his time provided that with Moises. Moises is another person, he's on his vicarage. It's a vicarage through the Center for Hispanic Studies through Concordia Seminary. Again, he does this training by distance over the internet. He can be here in this area. So we're working with him right now. We have an established Hispanic congregation, but how do I help him make that transition? Pastor Enrique is also helping us with that, of helping in him in his leadership and becoming a leader in that group. And so you can kind of see our different language groups. We got some young guys here in the middle there. Vincent, who's here today, was at one of the other workshops. 26-year-old, grew up in our congregation. He's half Jamaican, half Anglo. Came back from college and goes, I kind of need to learn a little bit more about my faith. What is my faith, and grow in that. He's a local 3rd grade teacher at a public school right down the street. He's engaged. He's going to get married this next month. His fiance is half Nigerian, half Filipino. And we have a missional community going now. And they're some of the leaders in that. And he's like, how can I impact youth? I want to be able to impact teenagers and younger kids. How do I do that? So how do I invest my time in him and helping him grow as he is able to do that with others? Okay. Ephraim right here, he's Eritrean. You can see many of these are starting to be on our leadership. Dawid is on our leadership. Moises is on our leadership. Ephraim right here is on our leadership. Vincent probably will be next year for our entire congregation. I'm trying to start passing the baton and new eyes, different perspectives of the world, rather than just one perspective of seeing that. So how do we embrace that? This means, pastors, high accountability, low control. So there's a high accountability of we care for one another, there's trust that's there, always checking in with them, yet at the same time, I'm not trying to make all the decisions for them. They're going to grow in that. Will they fail? Sure. Did I? Still do. And they're going to grow throughout that. How do I have a caring and accountable relationship with them that of trust, yet at the same time give them that freedom of control to be able to grow in that leadership and allow the ministry to go where the Lord is moving them and their hearts in that. Number 5, this is a biggie. Invest in people. We're really good at investing in programs. We're really good at investing in buildings. How do we invest literally in people? This is a big thing Greg talks about. 2 or 3. 2 or 3. I've been narrowing down, right? I try to get the whole congregation to move. Greg's like, Aaron, no, 2 or 3, not the whole group. Invest in 2 or 3. Spend your time, pour your time. What does Jesus do, right? He pours his time into 12. Sometimes he only pours his time into 3. James and John and Peter, that's it. So how do I pour my time? A lot of my time as I'm shifting, I still need to be pastor and shepherd of the congregation. Still do shut-in visits or hospital visits or help with counseling or preaching, all those things. But a lot of my time is starting to shift and help the congregation to see, how do I start to invest my time in specific people? And then you also investing your time in specific people. Okay? So here are some of the young adults that we've started gathering in a missional community. I'm saying this is an important group that I need to invest time in. Our Hispanic group over here, that was a lot of group that I have spent time investing in. Now Moises, I'm investing my time in Moises so he can invest time in them and start to pass that baton. This is huge. Young people. You know, if you look at most young people, when I was like, we want to connect with young people. And I said, okay, well, we've got young people. One time last year we had graduation. People were graduating from kindergarten, 6th grade, 8th grade, high school, college, you know. So I brought them all up in front at the end of the service. And there were a lot, the older people, man, there's a lot of young people there. So I said, okay, now you probably don't know all of their names, even though we're a small church. So I'm going to have them tell their name, where they're graduating from. Your homework right after the service is to go and talk to them about, you know, what's next, or what you like about this, and so forth. They said their name, the whole thing. After that, we had adult Bible study about 20 minutes, 30 minutes later, and I said, okay, who did their homework? Nobody raised their hand. You know, and one time said something, you know, Tim's kid. I said, no. His name is Jordan. Okay? Tim is his dad, but Jordan's been here since he was born. Jordan's 15. Okay? So, how do we invest even in our young people? The biggest investment we make with them is just knowing who they are. Asking, man, yeah, you graduated. Or take them out once a month. Hey, let me go buy you, you know, something to drink or something to eat. How are things going? How do we invest literally in a person's life? That has the biggest impact for helping connect a young person or keep them connected, especially when they go off through high school, college age, of having that connection that you actually care about their life. And asking questions about that and encouraging them. Pick one person. Just pour yourself into them. All right. How are we doing on time? 2:35. Number 4, form missionaries locally. This is kind of Greg's whole presentation. Greg Finke was talking earlier. If you don't have his book, really, really good. He'll kind of help you through how to think about this. Forming missionaries locally, right? A missionary is someone who is sent. That's what the word means. Okay? Where are you sent? Greg said you're sent to family, friends, coworkers, the people who are already in your sphere of influence, in your life. The people where God has planted you here and planted them around you. So how do we start to help form us, being formed with that mindset, a missionary mindset? Okay? I've had trouble with this. I'm starting to do that a little bit more. We're doing this a little bit more in that missional community that we started with our young people. I'm hoping that out of our time even today, we have some people who are a little bit older that came today, that they'll say, and how I can help them a little bit to see that. Forming missionaries locally is, how do we do life on life in the midst of everyday life? Discipleship happens when we live life together in life in the midst of our everyday life. It isn't discipleship class from 7 to 8 p.m. and here's your packet and you write it through. How do we eat together? How do we pray together? How do we enjoy time together? How do we read the Word together? How do we talk with one another, listen to one another, rejoice with one another? How do we do that? Our world becomes so separated and privatized. Right? We have garages that people drive cars in and you never actually see neighbors. How do we allow places for that to happen in our homes or in other places, third space places that aren't necessarily the church building? How does that happen? Forming missionaries locally. This is important for our synod. if we want to do multi-ethnic ministry, we have to find guys who don't look like me. Right? We have to find guys who are either first-generation immigrants if we're doing different language ministry, or we need to find 1.5 and second-generation immigrants who are already in a multi-ethnic reality. Okay, if we look at St. Louis and Fort Wayne seminaries for those guys, they're not there. Okay, our church body is an upper Midwest church body. Most people who go to the seminary, and this is not bad, this is just a reality, most people who go to the seminary, they're going to be more like me. Okay? So how do we learn how to raise up people and invest in people where we're at instead of only looking at the seminaries for those things? How do we find ways for that to happen right where we're at? And that's kind of what we're trying to do. Even Dawit, who was our Eritrean, a lot of that was I was doing work with him, spending time with him, investing in him, doing classes with him, inviting him over to dinner. Literally, both his parents died when he was younger. It was like, you're my family, I'm your family. How do we invest in them locally and allow them to be raised up right where they're at, rather than hoping to bring someone else in from the outside? In our context, many of the best people that we have to be missionaries in our community are people who are already in our community. So how do we make connections with them? Think about that in your own community. For us, a lot of it was just making friends. Kind of what Greg was talking about. How do we be with other people? This is a biggie. Be creative with funding. So I said our congregation in English when I started on a Sunday morning about 6.5 years ago, we probably had 130. Now in English, we probably have about 70 on a Sunday. And you got a lot of people. Some people left because I don't like this Hispanic ministry, but most of it is just people have kind of died. And when older people were there, their kids or grandkids that were from out of town or an hour away, well, mom wants to go to church, it's Mother's Day, so we'll come to church. So you would kind of get this, there was a widow, but she'd oftentimes bring 2 or 3 with her that were family members that lived elsewhere. But once the widow dies, then what happens? Those are gone. So even though maybe you passed away, we've had 15 people maybe that died, you maybe have lost 30 or some of that influence. So all of a sudden when that happens, what happens with your funding? You go, oh my gosh, people start freaking out about that. Now at the same time, because of our Hispanic ministry or our African ministry, we probably on a Sunday morning have about 150 people worshiping. So we probably have more people worshiping now than we did 7 years ago, but our budget is a lot less because the people that we have worshiping aren't in the same socioeconomic, financial range that the people that have passed away. So how do you be creative about doing that? Well, some of those things, the 2 guys, Moises and Dawit that you saw up here, they're working priests. They have full-time jobs. And that isn't ideal, but how do you figure out how to do that? Some of us, we've now gone to, my wife, we have 4 boys, and our youngest has just started preschool, so my wife is volunteering time to help with me in the office, so we're not paying a secretary's salary. I have to figure that out. One of the things is building partnerships with people, with congregations, or even outside of the Christian faith, in the sense of those that you might find partnerships. Many people rent space, okay, and that's a way to do that. But even thinking of other ways of beyond that, how to do that. Part of the thing that I'm praying about is we have several congregations in our circuit that are struggling. And how, one of the things I've been praying about is how do we make partnerships with them? And say, we may not be able to raise back up something, the Lord may do that, but how might you want to partner with us in a sense of seeing the Lord do something in our area and something new? How do we see ourselves as church together, not just isolated congregations? Would you want to be a part of that? Okay, yeah?
Are those congregations in similar situations to yours or not?
Many of them are. Yep, some of them are further along than we are in the sense of 20, 30 people, everyone in their 70s, 80s, so forth. So in the East Bay, if you go north to Berkeley and north, we have I think we only have 3 churches left in that circuit from Berkeley north. And we're from Oakland down to Fremont. The majority of our churches, we've had a couple that have already died, and then the rest most of them are struggling. And a lot of it is all this transition that's gone on.
Sure.
And the church not being able to adapt to it quickly enough. Yep. So how do we think of ourselves beyond just our own congregational sphere? So being creative. Number 2, this is a biggie. When we think of gathering with other believers, our temptation is with another immigrant group or with others that are maybe different than us, is to approach them as their patrons or that they are our projects. Patrons meaning I'm here to help you. We're here to make sure you're okay. Or project, we're here to make something happen through you. But how do we think of ourselves as partners? That sheet that I passed out just to several of you kind of randomly, I didn't have enough copies, I apologize. There was one on the back, it says 4 stages to multi-ethnic ministry development. Some of you had, I'll just read it off because it was good. He says there's kind of 4 stages that we go through of kind of starting with this patrons, projects, and getting to partners. First one, he says that first stage in multi-ethnic ministry is distance. The attitude is we do things separately. The viewpoint is they're different than us. The practice is we do things differently and separately, we don't understand them, we don't try to blend together. You're over there, we're over here. Okay, it says the next stage. Okay, and we have people all along these stages. Next stage is tolerance, attitude. We let them do things with us. The viewpoint is they're acceptable. The practice is we invite them to join us. We practice our cultural distinctives. So yes, we're going to do Reformation service with sauerkraut and bratwurst because we're Lutheran and that's what we do. Even though they might be Lutherans from Africa, and they're like, what's sauerkraut? Right, so that would be an example. Okay, you can come to our Oktoberfest Reformation thing and you can eat our food and be in our worship. That's a tolerance thing. We hold the decision-making positions. We're still in the leadership, we're still deciding what's going on. Stage 3, sympathy. The attitude is we do things for them. Viewpoint is they're needy, they need our help. The practice, we gather information about them, we intentionally seek to include them, we develop ways to help them. Okay, that's fine. Yet, we want to get to the 4th there. Stage 4, respect. We do things with them, they are equals. We get their input to help make decisions. They are represented in key leadership positions. Their cultural distinctives are utilized and supported. That's a spectrum that we find ourselves on, but how do we see moving towards that? And sometimes even having that in front of us helps us say, how am I viewing this situation? Lord, help me with this. And even asking, a lot of times I'll ask Dawid or Moises or some of the others that I have built trust with, and I say, okay, tell me really how things are. Where Dawid, after 6 years, we have a relationship where he knows that he can actually tell me and not go, well, Pastor wants me to say this, so I better say it this way. No. Now he knows enough where it's like, okay, there's a relation to this bill. I say, yeah, Pastor, that's not going to work. Okay, good. Thanks for letting me know. Or why don't we think about doing it like this? All right, tell me more about that. I need to learn about that. Where there's trust that needs to be built over time, that they know that they can say, you're my pastor, I respect you, because there is that aspect, but they don't want to say anything. Yet at the same time, if there's that trust built, they'll say, why don't we think about this way? Because they have a different perspective than I do that I need to be able to learn. Funny, in our Hispanic group, right? Whenever we talk about something, and I'm like, okay, what do you think? You know, and everyone's like, sounds good, great, great. And then that week, my wife will get a ton of phone calls because my wife's got them on. My wife, and they're like, well, how come we don't do it? And why don't we do? And how come we're doing this? And she's like, why didn't you talk? Well, he's the pastor, and there's like a distance. So how do we even find those connecting, those liaisons that are able to help us make those bridges even for me as I need to grow? I need feedback and to be able to do that. So how can we start to think of ourselves as partners rather than patrons or projects in those people and think about those stages as they go along? Last one. In the midst of all this, and you may be going, oh my gosh, my head's spinning. In the midst of all this, we cling to is that the Spirit of Christ knows what He's doing and is at work. And I put some theological stuff up here as Lutherans. Luther said, you know, what makes a theologian? Prayer, meditation on God's Word, and then trials and attack by Satan. When you go to the seminary, you know, you talk about this, but then many of you who are in ministry here, then when you're actually out there, you're like, okay, this is a reality. This can be tough. Well, in the sense of that, the prayer of the Holy Spirit. I remember reading a theologian talk about, oftentimes we have our plans, and we say, okay, let's pray for our plans, in the sense of, here's my plans, Lord, make it happen.
Right.
And he said, you know, prayer is really more like setting up a sail on your boat that isn't moving and saying, Lord, when and how you will it, that your Spirit blow where he wants to blow us. And I would say in these 6.5 years, many times my sail feels like my white flag that I'm raising and going, I give up. I give up. Yet at that time, it's when we say, Lord, I give up, I can't do it. That's when he says, okay, now you're ready for me to do something.
Had to be. You had
Exactly.
to get to that point.
Exactly. And he keeps reminding me of that. And then all of a sudden, ooh, there's a door that opens. That prayer drives us into God's Word, and reminding us drives us to Christ. Greg does it great. Jesus is on the loose. He's doing the heavy lifting. He's already way ahead of you. He knows what he's doing. He's inviting you to come along. Not for you to go for him, but to come along with him. In the sense of that. And his grace is even sufficient for us that fail over and over. And then the trials and attacks. That's going to happen. And that does happen. Like I said, we've had several people leave the congregation. Even though we reach out and we say, you know, let's reconcile, yet at the same time, here's where the Lord is moving us. At some point then we say, let me pray for you and bless you that the Lord might place you in a gathering of where you can grow in your Word. Because there's a temptation for us to feel like we're being held hostage, and that's hard. We don't want to manipulate people, we don't want to push people, yet at the same time, there's going to be trials and attacks that happen. And that's going to drive us back to prayer. One of those is, not I've got a problem, but Lord, you've got a problem. I can't deal with this. I don't have the solution to this. I don't know how to resolve this. So Lord, you've got an issue. I know you can deal with this, and I know you know all about this. So I'm turning this over to you in the midst of all that. I think it's interesting when we read through the book of Acts, the title of the book, we say Acts of the Apostles, which is probably not a very good title, right? It's the acts of Jesus through his Spirit. And if you look through, the disciples in the Gospels, they really don't have a clue. The resurrection, the crucifixion, the resurrection opens our eyes, Pentecost. Yet still through the book of Acts, who's dragging the apostles everywhere they need to be going? The Spirit of Christ. There's so many times where they're still like, no, what are we supposed to be doing? And God continues to say, no, you're over here. Right? Paul even wanted to go to Bithynia. He's like, I'm heading there. And what does the Spirit do? No, you're not. You're not going there. Shutting the door, moving you over here. And to realize that Peter and Paul and all that group, if they were clueless in a way and the Lord's guiding them, imagine me. And realizing that he still is doing what he does. And how do we realize that and take hope from that and comfort in that in the midst of all those questions that we have and going, oh my gosh, how do we do this? He says, take another step and follow me because I'm already way ahead of you. I've already put all the pieces into place down the road, even though you can't see it. So, that was just kind of a quick, like I said, it gave you a whole bunch of ones there. But thinking about those things, maybe in your own context, what are those things that you're doing? What are those things that might be able to help you? What I want to do right now is open up, we got about 10 minutes. Just maybe if you have specific questions or in your own context of ideas. Some of you are probably going to ask, how did you connect with all these people? Some of that is getting to know people. Some of that is a lot of just literally since I've been there praying and going, Lord, I'm not the person to do all of this. You've put me here for a reason, but there are others as well that you can connect me with. A lot of that is praying that the Lord will provide those people at that right time. Now, we continue to work. We continue to pray about it. We continue to do that. He'll bring those people. but how do we make those connections, the neighbors that are around us. One thing I would suggest, maybe you're in a community that it's 60-70% Hispanic. If you live in the Central Valley, that could be a lot of communities. You're like, oh man, I don't know Spanish, I need to learn Spanish, and so forth. You may just want to think of, how do I connect with a person who is Hispanic that's bilingual? Maybe it's even a younger person, a 1.5 to second generation. That maybe you find some commonalities and they're not maybe as afraid of you as maybe someone else would be, and you can build some trust and invest in that relationship and that friendship. One thing for me as a pastor is, I really, really want to connect with young men. Because the Lord, and not to say that old men or young women or older women, but in a sense as a pastor, how do I connect with young men? Because if I connect with young men, who are they going to connect with? Young women, children. If we have men, man, a lot of things fall into place and that helps. Just God's design. So for me specifically, I think about that. It might be different for you. You might say, I'm an older woman, how do I connect with young women that need help in parenting because it's really tough? What are those people that you can connect with? Go ahead.
So, somebody knowledgeable told me once that there is no Hispanic ministry. There's Guatemalan, there's Colombian, there's Cuban, there's Mexican, and just because they share a common language doesn't necessarily mean they want to worship together, want to do things together. Is there a Hispanic ministry, or do you get more?
Yeah, I mean, those are words. I think you will find some Hispanic ministries that will be very Guatemalan dominated or El Salvadorian dominated, but you'll see other Hispanic ministries that have a mix of people from different places as well. So I wouldn't say it's one or the other. I would say most people who come from Latin America, when they hear the word Hispanic, they're like, what's that? Because it's not a term that's a very term that's used in the States. They're like, I'm Guatemalteco, I'm Guatemalan, I'm Mexican, I'm El Salvadorian, I'm Peruvian. Or they may say I'm Latino. But Hispanic, like, yo soy hispano, they're like, well, I don't even know what that is. That's very much a term that I think the U.S. Census actually made up that term. Okay?
We call it Hispanic.
Yeah.
Hispanic.
So, in that, I would just look at, you want to, instead of thinking about, man, this whole big picture, find one person and connect with them as a person. And allow that to come
So
from that.
you can do something in the Hispanic area, and then depending on who shows up, adds a different flavor to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Obviously, that works with anybody, just people who are different and the gifts that they have. Yeah, I think there's an aspect of, I mean, we've had, clothing, our clothing bank that we serve thousands of people. We had a guy that showed up speaking Spanish, my wife talking to him, and she goes, Spanish isn't your first language, where are you from? And he goes, I'm from Turkey. And she goes, well, how did you learn Spanish? And he goes, work in an Italian restaurant. And now, in the midst of that, you say, well, okay, how does that work? Now, Spanish, there is that commonality of the language. There are differences as well. So I don't like to say, well, either do it this way or that way. The Lord works in lots of different ways. I would focus, again, who are those people that you're able to connect with? And we've done, backpack giveaways and Halloween things and all that. You get lots of people that come, but it's hard to make a relationship. Mm-hmm. And we've really pulled back from a lot of that. And we've said, let's put our energy rather into events, let's put our energy into people. One person, two people. Most of the way our Hispanic ministry is small, but most of the way it's grown, we've got a lot of people to move away, it's grown because someone in the ministry has invited their family or their friend because there's trust that's built with them. Enrique?
I just want to say something. I was the other day at your church, and they have a gathering, and I realized that in your Hispanic group, you have people from Guatemala, Mexico, Chile, Panama, and from Mexico, from different states of Mexico, and looks like they are everywhere having fun together, and I don't see any problems in the communication or things.
Yeah, and there are differences. Like our gal from Chile, I mean, part of that is that's who she is, but part of it is she's Chilean. So very, forward in your face, so forth. So there's going to be differences in people, just like if you get together and you say Anglo ministry, and you say, well, or is that German, Scandinavian, Italian, whatever the case might be. That's an example. I think the language is the commonality for them. For right now with the Africans, we have a Tigrinya group and an Oromo group, which are very close together. They have the same root language. It's an ancient language called Giz. Yet, they can connect, but their heart language of the first generation immigrant is still a different language. Where in Spanish, even though words are used differently, it's still the same language. So language is important. There's other cultural things beyond that.
Right now you have everyone kind of gathering, they get together at church, and are there other small groups or other off-site type groups that meet regularly that may not be coming to a centralized church?
We're starting that with the young adults. So our older group, they get together, but it's kind of like what he said. All the people I know, they're Christian. They all come to church here. So I've been trying to transition, getting lay leaders in our older group to help with that, to release me to some other things. So we've started a missional community with young adults that we're trying to gather people who are non-Christian or not connected, and those things are happening away from church per se. In the Eritrean group, they're very much scattered throughout the Bay Area because it's that cultural aspect of getting together. So they do have groups that get together, but they tend to be in San Jose or in Santa Rosa or in San Francisco. The Hispanic group, we had some home Bible studies. We're getting those back going again with Moises now, because my time was limited. So our new vicar, he's going to start a home Bible study on Wednesday nights. It'll be gathered in someone's home, but with the idea of an apartment complex, of inviting people in the apartment complex that are connected there, of doing that. Moises is from Mexico. He's a first-generation immigrant. He relates on a level that I can't relate on. Even though I speak Spanish, he is living the same experience of the people that he's connecting out to, where they look at me and they're like, yeah, you speak Spanish, but you're not living the same experience of what I'm living. So we're trying to go there. Yeah.
I moved about 2.5 years ago from the Southeast District, and they have a tremendous number of ethnic ministries that have gotten going in there. But I think they're all, like you described, I think they're all mono-ethnic.
Uh-huh.
And, some of what you learn, I think, would probably be invaluable. I don't know how you would have the opportunity to share it, but it would be valuable for that part of the synod.
Well, and when I gave this presentation at the Concordia Seminary, they had a multi-ethnic symposium in January, so I was there talking about that. I think one of the big things, and you bring up a good point I forgot to mention, the reason I put mono-ethnic to multi-ethnic and not white to multi-ethnic is our Tigrinya, our Eritrean group, they're mono-ethnic. Their children don't fit in there. So even a first-generation immigrant ministry, let's say you have first-generation Chinese ministry at your church, that's a great thing. But guess who they're going to lose? Their children. They're not going to fit in there. So how do we not just help an Anglo congregation, but how do we help any ethnic congregation? We're an ethnicity too. How do we help any ethnic congregation of a first-generation immigrant church? How do we help them see they need to help or be transitioning to multi-ethnic, because that's the reality for their children. So a lot of the reason that we're getting together now is we're literally trying to get everyone on campus at the same time. We haven't had it. We're going to start at Easter. We're literally, we'll have 3 language services going on, but the youth and young adults will be having a gathering of discipleship, not a service. We're going to start on discipleship and let a service come out of that, where they'll actually be together. So Eritrean youth, Hispanic youth, Anglo youth, whoever those are, they're all going to be there together at the same time. Where right now they haven't been, and what we're really doing is a disservice to them. We have 3 mono-ethnic groups, yet this group is just kind of sitting there going, we don't really fit anywhere. And not that I like breaking everybody apart, but there is a reality in immigrant ministry and transitioning to that. So we're really trying to see those people, 1.5 second generation, I said they live in 2 worlds, they're bridge people. So if you want to build your bridge across the river that's moved, okay, look at those people are key people. There are others as well. If you're going to do first generation immigrant, you need them. Moises is a bridge, right? he's a first generation Hispanic. I can't make that leap, he can help build that bridge. But for multi-ethnic reality, how do I invest in a person and people who are 1.5 or second generation? Because they're the ones that are going to be able to do it. Last one.
We worshiped for a while in Geneva, Switzerland, and there it was obviously multi-ethnic. And what happened is once a month, you had an Eritrean service. Another time it would be Swedish. Another time it would be something else.
Did they use headphones or?
No. We sang their songs in their language.
Yeah,
The preaching was done in English.
in English. And we've done bilingual services, trilingual services. Those are tough. They're hard. I mean, they can be good every once in a while, but to do it on a weekly basis is really hard. So I would just encourage you all, as you look through these, a big one is, Lord, who's one person I can connect with? And invest time and love into that person. Whoever that person I see as a bridge person. Who have you already stuck in my life for? And that can be a real gift just to them on a personal level to help them grow. Who might that person be in your life as well? The resources, just on the back of that sheet, I'm going to show you real quick. Again, some of these are more theological, some are more practical that you can use. I did put my email in the front, my phone number, if you ever have a question or want to call. We are in transition. We don't have all the answers. We're just kind of figuring out as we go along and making changes as we go along. But if your community has shifted demographically, I would be praying for your congregations and for our synod as well. We're one of the whitest church bodies in the whole country. I think we are. We in Elko. We're 96, 97% Anglo. And if you look at our country, especially in where we live here in California, how do we start to make that transition? And it happens one person at a time as we make those connections. Greg's image of building another plank out on the bridge over that river. Let's close with a prayer. Gracious Lord, we thank you for this day. Just thank you that you are Lord of the church. You know what you're doing, even when we don't. We thank you that you're already way, way ahead of us, and you call us. You do not manipulate us, you do not drive us, but you call us with words of grace and mercy and forgiveness and love, words of assurance that you're doing the heavy lifting, you know what's going on. I just ask that you would be with each person that gathered here and the congregations that are represented. Lord, as you bring people into our communities and into our lives, that you would give us courage and wisdom and humility, with eyes to see and hearts also to learn from others and build relationships with people and to see what you might be doing in our lives and in their lives as well. Lord, provide us with bridge people like Moses who grew up in two different cultures, people like Timothy who had parents from different cultures, people like Ruth who also related in two different cultures. Help us to see and utilize those people that are wonderful bridge people, even as your son Jesus was our bridge and is our bridge between heaven and hell. Our bridge that connects us to the Father. We thank you, Lord, that you have given us the gift of the ultimate missionary, Christ himself. Empower us, Lord. Give us boldness, wisdom, give us grace, that we might continue to follow you faithfully, knowing that you are faithful to us each and every day into your church as well. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you very much. If you need anything or have any questions,